This is SimNews.TV, and you're listening to the Super League show. Hello, everybody. My goodness me, I've only just recovered from just about the most exciting Super League race in forever. The Spa-Francorchamps round of the championship really spiced things up. It's wonderful what a bit of rain does for the racing, isn't it? Jake Sanson here, alongside Kacper and Ben Willis once again. Hello, boys. How have you recovered?
I don't think I fully recovered after that one. Hello, guys.
Jeez, that was a mad one.
Yes, it is. And how on earth do we round it all up? Well, I suppose the first thing we need to address, Ben, is the ever present game of musical chairs in GPVWC Super League, because it does happen every now and then. And we had a few interesting new faces.
Yeah, a few popped up. The main ones I noticed was Alex Siebel turning up at Adonis, filling in for Fran Lopez. He's been doing so well in Super Cup this year. He's leading the championship there, and came off the back of winning one of the Super Cup races. He's just been phenomenal. So really interested to see how he did. Time was still in at Wouters. He's become a primary there now. And also of note was Sven de Vries returning, and he came in at Storm Racing. Now it's been a while since we've seen Sven de Vries. In fact, he hasn't actually turned up anywhere at GPV this season, so first time for him there. And yeah, interesting to see him fill in at Storm. He maybe didn't have the best of race, but I'm sure we'll come back to that later on.
Yeah, it was interesting to see some of the Adonis drivers. Basically, the shuffle there was unexpected. I'm surprised. But then, of course, we will get on to the reason why one of them, at least, wasn't in the rankings. Now, we should, at this point in the proceedings, Casper, be talking about tyre strategy, but it's Belgium and it rained. So let's just forget about that and say it was quite easy. It was wet. Nothing else. Just wet tyres. Nothing else. Anything else was lunacy. Although there were a couple of other drivers out there who decided to be a little bit bonkers.
There are some very notable names actually that, as one of them would be, well, Rudy Van Buren. I mean, yes, there were some absolutely bonkers people that decided to go for Inters, but then, as it turned out, well, those tires lasted maybe the first stint, and then it was wet and wet and wet until the strategy played a little bit of a part at the end as well, but it was always wet tires until the end of the race.
Yeah, it was a very interesting day. And of course, the biggest news going in, never mind about qualifying, but we knew going in that there was going to be a bit of a dramatic turn of events for Vodbull, who have been the class of the field in every session pretty much this year, Ben. But going into this one, we knew that we were going to have two Vodbull motorsport cars at the back of the grid. That really shaped things up.
Yeah, I was pretty taken aback when I saw this, that Vodbull in both cars had taken an extra engine for the season. Now, each car is allowed 6 engines for the year, and they have to last all 18 races. We've seen a couple of people cut it pretty close, and we've actually had a few engine failures this year, notable ones at Hawkeye, at Canada, when they had that double failure. And seemingly, Vodbull wanted to play it safe and bring a 7th engine, obviously a fresh unit to Spa, which is a massive power track. And I guess I have to question the decision a little bit, because from where I was sitting, they were doing really well with engine management all season. They were utilizing the engines they had fully. They were trying to get 3 races out of them, and they were doing pretty well. And I'm a bit surprised to see them take this 7th engine, and that hindered them at the start of this race. And because of the rain, they didn't fully have that power advantage either. They couldn't put down all the power because it was so wet out there. So, seemed like a bit of a misplay from my side. It'd be interesting to see if any other team does that towards the end of the season, especially if they get a bit tight on the engine wear.
To be honest, I'll just jump in there for a second. I mean, one thing about this is it is a track where a fresh engine is going to be a key, and where it's going to be the biggest advantage to take it. So possibly as well, it would be the track where you would nearly want to be in the back, because the fresh engine will give you a bit of that advantage, and you can take this engine into Monza possibly, although it's going to be used up a bit, but it's still going to be fresher than having a 30 or something or 40 something percent engine. And yeah, especially now that it rained. But yeah, and the rain nearly possibly helped it to keep it fresh. So
That's true.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, and I think honestly, if you're going to take a seventh engine, you may as well take it on a track where you can overtake easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was always going to be an interesting one for overtakes. Let's be fair. It's Spa-Francorchamps in the current generation of the rules for the Super League. So let's talk a little bit about that qualifying session, because obviously we had a wet session all the way through, but drying towards the end. So several people decided, right, we're only going to have one crack at this on reasonably dry tyres. So let's give it a go. A few drivers decided to go on to Inters, and it was Jarl Tyen who just about edged out, of all people, Lucas Euler. I mean, that is one heck of a fight to come into with Tyen and Euler on the front row. It's deja vu.
It was a thrilling end to that session, actually. Like the last sort of minute was so hectic as everybody was, desperately trying to improve as the track slowly dried out. There wasn't much of a dry line, but there was enough that times could start improving. And I thought Euler had it when he came out the front with Kane and went fastest, only for Tyen to pip him by less than a thousandth, a tenth of a second. Let me get my times right. But it was a great performance by Jarl Tyen. He's looked fast in that Walters car since he's sort of started his Super League venture this season, and he played that session perfectly. He got the strategy right, made sure he was on track at the end when the track was fastest, and he served up the goods.
So now we've got to go into the race itself, because we obviously knew that the first lap, I think it was fair to say, Kacper, we kind of expected there to be trouble, not just because this is Spa, and not to take anything away from the drivers, because the standards are always very high, but because there were so many drivers out of position. I think that was what really made the first lap interesting.
Yes, that would be a lot. That would play a big part in it as well, and obviously the visibility would be absolutely atrocious. Again, it's just the rain, but yeah, you have so many fast drivers in the back, and obviously they're going to be trying to get as many positions before the first corner as they can, because yes, there's always the saying you can't win the race in the first corner, but if you're going to be held up for multiple laps, even behind the slow drivers, you may be compromising your ability to win if you're starting from the back of the grid and you know that the people in front of you are very slow. So there's always that gamble, and it's always a bit scary to have such a fast driver behind you if you're one of the slower drivers on the grid.
So we had the likes of David Francic in trouble, Florian Gaia, unusually one of those involved in the first lap incident. And of course, to a certain extent, Rudy Van Buren trying to make his way in the opening stages. But the way that those two Vodballs started to shoot up through the field was pretty incredible straight away. And I'm still baffled when I actually look back at this, Ben, that we saw Risto Capit make his move from 19th to first, by the way, by the time we got to the halfway point. I mean, it was like a carbon copy of Rubens Barrichello in Hockenheim 2000. He just owned that racetrack.
It was amazing to see, and I think I'm not sure how much the fresh engines played a part in it. I mean, obviously, it's helped them, to pass slower cars, especially down the Kemmel Straight. But that car looked so well set up for rain. I know team boss Mike Pittman, I was chatting to him on Wednesday, on the night before the race, and he said he was expecting thunderstorms, and he told his drivers that, and they had prepared for heavy rain. And you could see that because the Vodballs were just skiving through cars left, right, and centre, and Capit looked just so on it. He didn't make any silly mistakes. He profited when other people had their mishaps, maybe ran wide a little bit, which is so easy to do in that weather. But Risto just absolutely owned it, and to be leading by halfway after starting 19th is a pretty impressive feat.
Well, the way that all kind of set up, it all really goes back to a certain extent to lap 6. And we looked at Lucas Euler desperately trying to stay in touch with the leaders. He was slowly starting to lose grip. And of course, that was his first major experience of having to deal with in wet conditions with tyres that were falling off. So that little tangle with Dennis Jordan, and then in particular with Bart de Vos and Rudy Van Buren, that was where things really, really got a little bit hectic, Kacper. And it was sort of lap 6 to lap 7, where we saw a side to Lucas Euler we haven't seen for a while.
Yes, that wasn't exactly stellar from Lucas Euler, to be honest, at all. And I think a lot of it was there were there is some dangerous moves. There was dangerous rejoins on the track, and when you make a mistake, he started making mistakes, and then just seemed to have a bit of a brain fade for one lap. But that one lap just seemed to have so much action going on because of how much he dropped, and it has compromised races of so many other drivers that I think I hope that Lucas is going to take away from this, that he has to just be a little bit more careful, because that's not on at all.
I agree to extent some of that. I think some of the driving wasn't on at all. Obviously the dangerous rejoin up at the bus stop chicane. The Euler can do better than that. We know that, and the tangle, should we say, with Rudy Van Buren wasn't the best of driving from Lucas. But I think some of the latter events, sort of going into lap 7, were a bit heightened, I guess, by the fact that his tyres would have been extremely hot by going off on lap 6, because this all started when he overshot into the braking zone at the bus stop. So his tyres will be extremely hot, and the wets really don't cool very quickly. They're a really weird compound of tyre. We talked to death about tyres, but they hold their heat quite a lot in certain conditions, and you could see throughout the start of lap 7, Lucas just had no grip whatsoever, and he was struggling so much. So maybe, not having that tyre under him for half a lap, that hindered him a lot. It doesn't excuse the driving, and I'm sure the DC will look into that. It's obviously not our job to decide what penalty he gets. We can only speculate, but if he gets a penalty at all, even. But I don't think all of that was Lucas's fault. But I don't think he helped himself either.
No, indeed. I tell you what, it was an interesting sort of subtext to the race, because when we got past that, we had drivers start to come into the pits, and it was a critical point in the race because some drivers were starting to think, we need to get a way around this. And there were 3 big names in particular who caught it really badly wrong. Rudy, Alex, Cooper, and Lee Morris in particular. They all decided, you know what, we're going to try a gamble here. They rolled the dice. And normally those 3 are guys who, when they roll the dice, it works. It was quite astonishing, Kacper, that this time they decided to make the switch, and it was the wrong tyres at the wrong time.
Yeah, it's quite astonishing. And to be honest, I think they were all going off of Rudy's first stint. It was he was just as quick as anybody else on the track, really, and he was on the inters and seemed to be able to control the car perfectly. The car was perfectly stable, and I think even you mentioned as the race was going on live that he just looks so planted compared to a lot of people who are struggling on the wets. But I think from that point, the rain has intensified, and just it was more of a guess that went completely the wrong way. And then what was even worse is that they actually kept going on those tires and kept losing time, even though a pit stop here only cost you about 10 seconds, and they lost a lot more than that.
I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, because normally people like Cooper and Lee Morris, and in particular Rudy Van Buren, they're usually really, really good at getting the tyre strategy, but it was quite astonishing to see so many people on the back foot. But what, of course, it did do for 2 things was that it gave Rudy Van Buren a bit of an issue, because he had to then struggle through the entirety of the race with major, and I do mean major, suspension damage throughout the entirety of the race after his tangle first with Euler, and then a couple of other things that happened through the race. And being on the wrong tires at the wrong time kind of exacerbated the problem to a certain extent. It was a very unusual Rudy Van Buren that we saw, Ben, considering the fact that, not counting Sochi when he had his internet drop out, he had not finished this season lower than 2nd. And here he was struggling even to come home 8th.
Yeah, Rudy really struggled. It's that first stint he did brilliantly on the intermediates, making them work compared to everybody else who was either slightly leaning on the wets too much and overheating them, or just didn't feel comfortable. Rudy was absolutely stellar, and like Bristow, his teammate, he was fighting through the field and gained many places. But then he had the contact with Euler and also stayed on the intermediates, and that was suddenly a balance of a quite damaged car. You could see it wasn't behaving anywhere near as well as it did in the first stint. and then the rain intensified as well, and it was quite clear the intermediates just didn't work. So it was a tough one for Rudy specifically. I remember when Mike came on the stream, he said that they tried to fix the damage on Rudy Van Buren's car, but it didn't do much at all. So they were unlucky in that respect. And I think we're totally right in saying that the likes of Cooper and Morris did try and follow Van Buren. They saw that the intermediate worked in that first stint. Just unfortunately, they were unfortunate that they couldn't predict the way the weather was going. And it is so hard at Spa as well. It's basically got its own microclimate. You never know what the weather's going to do. Just today, they rolled the dice in it, and it didn't work out.
It's very true. And one of the guys who could very easily have taken advantage of that was Flo Gaia. But obviously his issues on the first lap notwithstanding, he had a genuinely golden opportunity there. But all of a sudden, it all fell away, Kacper. I mean, this is Flo Gaia having been as brilliant as he was at Silverstone, and it just didn't seem to happen. I mean, this is... It's unusual because we tend to see people like Flo having an absolutely incredible race in these circumstances, and it just didn't happen.
It just all went wrong, didn't it? He started off nearly a back foot very early on, and it was such a stark contrast to his teammate as well. It was very odd to see one of the Nordstrom cars doing so very well for a lot of the race. Of course, Vidok running there in the top three, battling for a possible win for a lot of the race, and then just constant misfortunes, spins, just I think everything going wrong for Geyer. And I think it's just one of those races. I'm not sure what was going on here, but I just hope that Flo comes back stronger.
And the thing as well is that with people like Gaia and Cooper and Van Buren and Morris having a struggler, we really got to see some fantastic performances from several other people. So let's talk a little bit about Jarl Tyen from pole position. He was the only one really who was able to take a proper candle to Risto Capit. And David Videk, he was very, very solid and consistent as he always is. Another great podium considering how tough his season has been. But it was great to see a really nice mix of drivers on the podium. You've got Risto, you've got Jarl, and you've got David. That was an absolutely brilliant podium.
It was really refreshing, actually. Just nice to see different faces up front, really, after... I wouldn't call it stagnant, but we've seen Vobble always at the front. Van Buren's always been up there, Capit's always been up there, Morris has always been up there for Mad Cape. So it was nice to see some different faces up there. Tyen did superbly, I thought, in it was an okay Wouters car. The Martux engine again is okay, not quite near the Valiant, but it's a good car. And he put in a great drive, had a great fight with David Videk for a lot of the race as well. Videk did brilliantly, did what he needed to do at Nordstrom to try and claim some points back from Rudy Van Buren. Did a good job there. Jeffrey Fournier as well. Red Archer P4. When was the last time we saw a Red Archer that high up?
Absolutely. Oh, it was amazing to watch, wasn't it? And that was it was a really feel good factor, that race, because there were so many teams who did an absolutely brilliant job. I mean, Jeff Fournier, he showed a lot of that stellar performance that he's proved in Super Cup this year. He's been a race winner on a consistent basis in Super Cup, and it's been great to observe, particularly when you go back to places like Red Bull Ring, where he really pulled out the stops. Here at Spa, he had an opportunity to just, there was nothing to lose, there was nothing to gain. He just had an opportunity to fill in for somebody, and wow, he very nearly won at one point. First couple of laps could easily have gone a slightly bit better for him, and he could easily have got himself into a position to win the race, never mind be fourth place. So, in qualifying in particular, the Red Archers were absolutely stellar, not just Fournier, but also Michael Ayers. We have to take that into account. There was one point in the qualifying when those cars were both on the front row. I mean, that could have been an absolutely amazing race for them. But, fair play to both of them being as strong as they were. Michael Ayers, unfortunately, one of those drivers whose race fell apart, but you can't really take anything away from the effort he put in all weekend. He was a strong driver, good competitor. With Jeff Fournier, he really rose to the occasion. It was great to watch.
No, it was fantastic again, and it was a incredible showing from Red Archer. It was a bit nearly like what we've seen from especially Fran Lopez last season. It kind of has that kind of vibe where it's just this team, and it's the same team that just doesn't seem to have any reason to be up there, but they're there and they're fighting for it, and they're fighting with their with everything they've got, and it was absolutely fantastic. And for Fournier, again, for somebody who's it's their first season and not even a full season, just some races here and there. I think it's just incredible to see him in the fourth and for him to be fighting up there. And Iris, I mean, who knows? Maybe he'll next time he'll come back stronger, and who knows what will happen.
I think if sorry, I was just going to say, I think if Aries can work on his finishing rate, then Red Archer could be on for a really good end of the season here. They've got some really good drivers now. The car is all right. They could score some really good points and move up from 7th place.
It's a very good point you make, actually. The other thing I want to talk about is that Fournier, at one point, could actually have got himself onto the podium, and it's because David Feideck's team, Nordsjan, at one point, the pit stop strategy kind of fell apart a little bit. There was a pit stop that was incredibly long. I don't even know what the reason for that is. It certainly wasn't clear at the time. Kacper, have we been able to get any understanding as to what happened there at Nordsjan?
I don't actually know necessarily. I haven't really looked into that into that big of a detail, but it's very odd. He went into the pits, I think, at the same time as Jarl Tyen. It was actually a kind of basically an on-track battle, if I recall correctly. And Feideck came into the pits late as an answer, so I don't think it would make that much of a difference. But maybe his crew wasn't ready.
It could have been that. There is a random amount of error that can be applied if you don't request your crew in rFactor 2. Whether it was to the extent that was applied here, I'm not too sure. It's possible maybe he also slightly overshot his box, or he had a little bit of damage that he forgot to turn off that needed repairing. Could have been a small knock, but that could add a few seconds. But ultimately, it was a bit unlucky for Feideck, and he could have been a little closer up to Tyen. But still, great drive for P3. Really good drive.
Yeah, it was really, really good. Adonis, it's worth talking about them as well, because very similarly to Red Archer, for a time in qualifying, they had 2 cars on the front row. But it's also worth pointing out that both of their men managed to get into the top 6, and really good solid points all from Adonis. And that's an important point to make a note of there, Kacper, because without their lead driver Fran Lopez, it would have been very easy for the team to not really have a frame of point of reference as to where they were going to go this weekend on strategy, because their lead driver was gone. But both drivers filled in absolutely brilliantly, to the point where Fran may not even have a drive for the next round of the championship. They did an absolutely cracking job.
That would be a bit odd, to be honest, for somebody who's that quick. But yeah, he's also so inconsistent this season, and suddenly it's a little odd when he leaves the Adonis. Although it was such a crazy race, I think he hasn't lost his job. But yes, the subs were absolutely brilliant. They both finished, and they both finished so high. This is more along the lines of what we would have expected from Adonis from the beginning of the season, because of their position the season prior. But I just hope to see Adonis in this kind of form for more races of the season, without all of the shenanigans of the weather and all that, because I think it's just one of those teams which seem to be so disappointing this season, and this is a very, very good thing to see.
You say the mix-up with the weather. To be P5 and P6 in that kind of weather, I think is testament in itself. It's a good car. They had a decent setup. The car drove okay. And Dennis Jordan and Alex Siebel, Siebel's first race in Super League.
Yeah.
This is a guy that is focusing constantly on Super Cup because he's going for the title there. He's been called up pretty late to fill in an Adonis car, and he's gone and put it P6 and scored some brilliant points. I mean, it's a brilliant drive from Adonis, and hopefully they can keep it up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we have actually seen him race the day before in Super Cup and win races there. So it's incredible to see somebody come into such a difficult and high level racing series and suddenly do so well. So I've said it when we were actually commentating on that race, but I would love to see him actually do a full season next year, because I think he'd find himself very well in this series.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's great to see the way that things are currently evolved. Okay, let's talk about some of the other teams who perhaps didn't have so good a run. Mad Cape. There was a great chance here, a really great chance here for two cars in the top six for various reasons. Lee Morris, because he's Lee Morris, and Nick Rowland, because in the early stages, he was genuinely doing an incredible job. I mean, fair play to Nick Rowland. We've had our ups and downs with him over the course of the season. And we've said, the pressure's been on him to get that car home into the points, and he's made mistakes and things have struggled. But at Spa, certainly in the first half of the race, he looked really, really competent. And I genuinely thought there was going to be some really good performances. But in the end of it all, a 10th for Morris, a 12th for Rowland, that's not many points. And when you consider that these guys are trying to fight in terms of the championship fight to close up on Nordsian and stop the likes of Valters Automotive and, the Street Fighter Systems and all these teams trying to close up on them, that was a critical error. And that's a race that they can't really afford to repeat again, Ben.
Yeah, it wasn't the best from Mad Cape. You could see they weren't really that prepared for the rain. The car didn't look amazing. The drivers were struggling quite a bit. But they got it to the end. They got some points. I guess that's the positive you can take here. Unfortunately, Wouters scored more of them with only one car finishing. So, the gap there in the standings now is 15 points between second and third, I believe. Third and fourth even. So Mad Cape third, and then 15 points back to Wouters in fourth. But I would have hoped that Mad Cape maybe could have capitalised a little more on this race, with Van Buren struggling, with one of the Nordsons out, with Wouters only having one car finish as well. You'd like to see the Mad Cape a bit higher, and just there's points they lost there that they should have really, really got.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about actually the Valters Automotive thing, because we go on and on about how great Jarl Tyne was, and the Norwegian did do an absolutely cracking job. But Gergo Baldi, this was one of the most controversial moments of the race, and it was talked about a lot in the second half. Baldi was doing okay. Lap 23, there was a little bit of a moment with him and Nick Rowland having a fair fight, I'd say. Neither driver was doing anything wrong. It was just one of those circumstances in the wet conditions. They ended up coming together, neither driver surrendering the corner. Yet they're racing drivers. What are you going to do? They're doing their job. Baldi then got a little bit wide, had to back out of it. There was arguments that he was losing the car anyway, but Rudy Van Buren was behind him. And because obviously Baldi had backed off a little bit on the curb, trying to avoid an incident, he then ploughed straight into the back of Gergo Baldi's car, damaging his own suspension in the process, but effectively pitching Gergo Baldi off and into the barriers and out of the race. Now, obviously, to the untrained eye, this looked as if Van Buren literally just shoved Gergo Baldi off the circuit. But looking into it more closely, Kacper, there's a lot more to this incident than meets the eye.
To be honest, what I've seen, it's a very difficult one, because usually when you see somebody drive into the back of another car, it usually is probably around 9 or even 19 times, 19 times out of 20, basically. It's going to be the fault of the person behind. But then you have that one time where somebody loses control. But here, would there be anything if Rudy slowed down, and if there is that question whether he should have slowed down or tried to power through? Because sometimes, on the other hand, there's always the problem where if somebody does lose control, sometimes it's better to go through the wreck quickly, because they could also hit you if you're going too slowly. So there's always it's a controversial moment, and I don't think I really have an opinion in terms of who's at fault here. But I think it was unavoidable that there would be some kind of a contact with after Baldi had slowed down so much.
I don't envy the DC on this one.
No.
All I would say is that if I was Rudy Van Buren and I'm sat behind Gergo Baldi and I've seen him spin, and then I've seen him go wide at Bruxelles, part of me would be thinking, okay, those wet tyres are going to be pretty hot, and they're not going to be giving much grip, and it's quite clear he's struggling. should I be right on his rear diffuser?
Yeah, that's
And
the thing. That's the thing I kind of have an issue with as well.
I think it's so hard to say in the spray and the heat at the moment, all the speed and that. But I think really could have backed off a little bit, and just preempt a little bit and just see that Baldi is struggling. And there is every chance he could lose it at turn 9. It's so easy to do it, and we see it every year in things like Formula 1 and in other racing series, that turn 9, the car's going to understeer there, there's AstroTurf on the outside, and it's wet. That is like skating on ice.
Yeah.
I think Rudy could have done more to avoid it, and the car behind it is usually their responsibility to avoid an accident. Does he deserve any kind of penalty? Not sure. It was quite tough, and I don't think he hasn't done it with any intent at all. There's no malice there. It's purely an accident, but it has put Baldi out the race. So
yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is that at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. I don't believe, and I don't think anybody really believes, that Gergo Baldi was intentionally rammed off the road by Rudy Van Buren. I don't think anybody really believes that. But the precedent here is not intent, it's consequence. And that's the difficulty, because I know in the world of professional motor racing in particular, where you can obviously see an incident like that and say that there was no intent. And I am agreed. I think everybody knows that, Rudy Van Buren did not intend to shove Gergo Baldi off the circuit. But you can't change the fact that the content did end Gergo Baldi's race. Baldi was off the circuit and rammed into the barriers, and that was it. Game over. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Van Buren deserves a penalty, but it certainly does need to be investigated at length. So I don't know whether there's going to be a post-race penalty imposed. I hope not, because, I can understand the argument for it, and I don't believe it was intentional. But at the end of the day, that contact did ram another driver off the circuit and ended their race. So it's how much you've gained from the incident, because obviously he then went on to finish in the points. And Gergo Baldi did not. So you have to take that argument into account. And I know in professional motor racing, an incident like that, they will get a penalty for that, whether they intended to do it or not. So it's a difficulty.
I think ultimately it's going to come down to whether Valters or Gergo Baldi have gone to the stewards and reported it. Because the way it works at GPV, if it's not in the first lap, then it's down to the person who feels they are the victim to put in a protest. So if they haven't put in anything, won't get looked at. We forget about it, move on. If it has, then okay, things get a little more interesting. And as you say, there is consequence in this, because technically Rudy Van Buren got a position out of this. And has got more points back in his recovery. For all we know, Baldi could have recovered and ended up P8 and Van Buren P9, and
of course
that could change the championship at the end of the year.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It could mean the difference between Valters being 3rd or 4th in the constructors' championship. So that's critical. Anyway, 14 cars finished the race. It was a really tough race of attrition. Probably the most exciting race of the season. I think not many people are going to argue with that one. Let's talk a little bit about the top 5, because obviously we've talked about it at length in terms of who's done well and who's not. Risto Capit taking the victory, as we know. Jarl Tyen in 2nd position, so close to a victory. It was great to see him pushing so hard. 3rd position from David Feidek, again, solid and consistent, doing a cracking good job. Jeff Fournier there in 4th position ahead of Dennis Jordan. And how about that for a result, by the way? 5 different manufacturers in the top 5 places. What a great race. Absolutely amazing. And great to see it being so even. So, I know we could go on about this for hours and hours. There was so much in that race. But we have to come to a close at some point. Kacper, your best thing of the race. Who was your best driver? Who was your best driver of the race?
Now, I have a couple candidates here. But to be honest, it's so hard to look past Risto Capit.
Yeah.
But to be honest, while it is hard to look past him, we have seen how incredibly fast he can be as well. And I honestly think that for somebody to debut into 6th place, I think Alex Siebel will get my driver of the day, just because of how difficult these cars have proven to be to drive and to do well in, and to do so in your debut in the wet. Day after racing in another series, At Spa.
Well.
I honestly think that he deserves the driver of the day without a doubt.
It's a very good argument. Ben, what's your counter argument? Or is there one?
I mean, honourable mention to Alex Siebel. He did absolutely brilliantly for your first ever drive in Super League. I've been there before. It's extremely scary and nervous. So to finish P6 in the pouring rain is brilliant. But my vote goes to Yao Tyan for a pole and a second place in the Wouters, which, let's face it, is not the best car out there. It's good, but it's the Norwegians should be beating it, and so should some of the others out there. But great performance from Yao Tyan.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yartine did an absolutely brilliant job. In terms of result, you can't really deny Risto Caput for driver of the day. He finally got his first win, but I'm going to plump for Jeff Fournier. That is one heck of an amazing drive, considering that he's filling the breach of Red Archer. I think he's done Super League once prior to this season. He jumped straight in and was so nearly on the podium. 2 or 3 laps to go. 2 or 3 laps more in the race, he could easily have been on the podium. Jeff Fournier was absolutely a mighty at Spa, and it was great to see him do so well. Team of the weekend. This one could be tougher because there's a lot of good candidates for this one. Ben, is there anyone you want to give it to?
Idonis for a somewhat return to the form of last year. Okay, we're not quite at the winning races and podiums, but a P5 and a P6 from 2 standing drivers in torrential conditions is a really good job. They beat the manufacturer of the Talos engines, Hawkeye. So showing them up as well. So great performance from Idonis, and I really hope it can
Okay,
continue.
Kacper, any thoughts? Team of the day.
I honestly think that's pretty much it. The Adonis shown that they can, at least this race, they actually were probably the most consistent of the teams in terms of finishing. Every other team has been kind of very spread out, and the only other team with cars that could have been very close would be Vodbull, but obviously with Rudy's damage and failed strategy, I don't think, especially on the strategy part, I think we can it's just Vodbull not quite being able to get that. So I'd say Adonis.
I think I can't really disagree with that. To be fair, when you consider that it's not just one car in the top 6, it's 2. And they genuinely looked like they were a threat for pole position. Well, they almost knocked out the front row. Let's not forget that. And, not just Dennis Jordan doing a cracking job, but as we've already mentioned, the rookie Alex Siebel looking not just able to compete at his level, but his equal for most of the race. He was on the same pace as Dennis Jordan for the majority of the race. So, yeah, absolutely. I don't think you can argue Adonis is the team of the race. Disappointment of the race. Ben, who was your not so impressive racing driver?
Ben Horrell, yet again, for retiring. I'll be honest, how he still has a drive at Street Fighter, I don't know. Because if you compare him to Francic, who has not had a DNF, has finished every race he's done in the points, the car's good. It's a good midfield car. It should be scoring points every race. And you look at Ben Horrell now, who is on to his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th DNF.
7th DNF, wow.
That's over 60% of the season. And yes, he's had bad luck. He's had accidents. He's been hit. But when it gets to 60, 70% retirement levels, something's not going right. And he's only had 2 point scores compared to Francic as well. 8 point scores from 8 races. So, yeah, I think questions need to be asked at Street Fighter. I can't see him staying for next year, and I think he really needs to pull something out of the bag before we go into the final third.
Okay, Kacper, your thoughts? Not so good driver of the day.
Well, let's be honest. Ben has an argument here, but I'm gonna go slightly different. And honestly, Florian Geyer has actually really disappointed this race.
Ooh.
That's a harsh one, but I see a point. I do see a point.
I mean, Florian has been up and down this season, and he has shown some great pace. It's just that this one race, it's more. I think it hurts more to disappoint in this fashion when you're on an up than when you're on the down as well. So it's more of I would have hoped for Florian to do a lot better this race, and it was just a bad race. It's just no other way about it.
I'm going to give you a similar sort of argument there. Mine is going to be Lee Morris, which is a
Oh,
shame, which is a real shame because I did feel that Lee Morris had the pace to win. I genuinely feel he had the pace to win at Spa, and I
yeah,
kind of expected him to go for it. So the fact that, once again, I know it's frustrating for him, and I know he's had a difficult race, but again, to state after the race, I hate racing in the wet anyway. This is a really difficult circuit. It's the wrong type of Spa. It just seems to be that there is always a catalogue of excuses that justify why Lee Morris has had a bad day. And I feel that there's a lack of humility that, characterizes a good racing driver, in that
yeah,
we hear time and time again. There are so many drivers in the field who have a bad day, like Flo Gaia, like David Fidek, like Rudy Van Buren, who will put their hands up and say, do you know what? I messed up and I'm hating myself for it. I did
mhm,
a really bad job and I can't blame anybody but myself. It's irritating and I need to go back and figure out what it is that I need to improve. Lee doesn't do that when things go wrong. He does it when they go right, I've
Mm.
noticed. When things go right, it's like, well, I could have been a bit quicker still. But when things go wrong, when he has a bad race, he can't seem to blame himself for it. And there's just that level of humility, particularly here at Spa,
yeah,
where I felt, no, Lee, you're that good a driver. You have the ability to win in these conditions with this car on this track against this opposition. The fact that you didn't is something that not necessarily you have to take ownership of, but you have to recognize that it might not be all of these catalogue of errors that you're talking about. There might be something in terms of a human error that you have to consider into it. And I think the fact that he still isn't quite able to bring himself to that point when things are going badly, I just, that should have been a Lee Morris victory for me. There are so many things that could have made that happen, and it just didn't. And again, it's not just the things that happen on track, because you could see in the middle pace of the race when he did have the right tyres on, he was flying. He was absolutely on it. He had the pace, he had the speed, he caught up. He made up half a minute on the rest of the field. That's a winning driver there. That's a driver who can win championships. And Lee Morris is no slouch. But again, it's just the methodology of which he's carrying himself. It's a little bit too Jason Plato to be funny. Do you know what I mean? There's not
yeah.
quite a. It's a little bit weak for someone as brilliant as Lee Morris, and I
I
kind of hope that this is just a temporary glitch.
I think the best drivers out there are the ones who could admit their own shortcomings and their own mistakes.
Yeah,
And until you can do that, and you can realize where you're not doing so well and where you need to improve, until you do that, you won't win a title.
yeah.
End of.
It's difficult because he is, for me, pound for pound, sector by sector, probably the fastest driver out there. I mean, you have to consider Rudy has got a great car underneath him, and he's cleaning up. But the Mad Cape is an awful car by comparison. And in qualifying, Lee is making it look astonishing. So
Yeah,
pound for pound, sector by sector, he's probably the fastest guy on the grid. He's a bit like Alonso in the McLaren. Do you know what I
mhm,
mean? He's got that ability to be the best. But there's just too many things going on in his head that perhaps cloud it. So it's difficulty. Maybe, though, at Monza, next time out, we'll see the Lee Morris that we know and love. The guy who's able to bang on pole position, stretch out a gap, and clear off, because Monza suits a driver like Lee. He has the ability to get into the mine zone, get out there. And I would love to see, actually, the thing I really want to see going into the next round of the championship is a straight, head to head, no nonsense dogfight between Rudy Van Buren and Lee Morris. That would be an absolutely incredible race victory for either one to win at Monza next time out. And I'd love to see it, but it's all going to be about speed, where, of course, Ben, Vodbull are going to have the upper hand no matter what anybody.
yeah. That this is Vobble territory. It's also Valiant engine territory, which does help Mad Cape out. Obviously, also running the Valiant engine, and it's also going to be in terms of setup who can get away with running the lowest wing and aim for top speed. Really, that's what it comes down to here. It's how much power can you get down on the track, get up to that top speed, and pass everybody in the slipstream. Um, Fresh engines here are going to be key, and this is where
Yeah.
Vodball's idea of taking the 7th engine may help. They can maybe rotate in another fresh engine. As far as I can work out, they may have one left. Not too sure, but if they've got a fresh engine, they need to be using it at Monza. Anybody on the grid needs to be using it. This is the biggest power track that we have left.
And of
Um,
course, well, one of the things that's really going to come into the fore here, Casper, particularly at Monza, is going to be tire strategy and tire life, because of course these cars are going to be pushed to the absolute limits, the fastest circuit on the calendar. it's going to be crucial to figure out who's going to go ultra soft, who's going to go super soft, and how long they're actually going to last. I mean, this is a race that's only 53 laps long, but we could still see 7 or 8 pit stops.
It's going to be interesting. Although, to be honest, Monza is one of those tracks which shouldn't really use the tires too much, considering we don't have too many. Well, it still will use the tires.
We've said that before, haven't we?
That's right, we've been here before.
We've been here before many times.
Yes, and I don't even mean that they're going to do 3 or 4 pit stops. It's still going to be 5 or more than likely. But I just mean that it's going to be less than some other circuits, and it's more. I'm just wondering if they're going to go for slightly harder tires like what Nordstrom did last year, because that's the exact track where you would actually do that and possibly get away with it. Because if you can make them last long enough, you won't be losing too much, I don't think. Because obviously the top speed is one of the biggest parts of Monza.
Yeah, it's a good point. Ben, very quick, final question. Can anybody beat Vodbull at Monza? Can it be done?
No. I think, providing we don't get rain, this is, again, it's Van Buren's to lose.
Okay. Kacper, same question.
I think it's unless Van Buren gets a penalty. I think it's
true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that is a possibility because we're not sure what's going to happen with that investigation from Belgium, if there is going to be one. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. Let's look forward to Monza then. The scrutineer is obviously going to give you all of the technical bits and bobs from Super League on the 23rd of August, straight after our SimNews.TV coverage of the GPVWC Super Cup, which of course Ben and Kacper will talk you through every lap of both of those races, which is on the Wednesday of next week. You're back with us on the 31st of August for all of the roundup from the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. If you're on Twitter, at SLShowSN, a nice follow would be nice. Do interact with us, of course, as well with the hashtag SLShow when commenting on something from the program. And, of course, give the cheeky commentators at Downforce UK a bit of a like at Downforce UK. Myself and Josh will be back in the commentary box for the Italian Grand Prix. And hopefully our own Dan Blake will be back in action to join the team for Formula Challenge as well. A huge thank you once again to Ben and to Kacper. Thank you, boys.
Thank you as always.
Thank you.
A very refreshing podium finish from the Belgian Grand Prix with Risto Kappitz, his first ever Grand Prix victory at last. David Feideck and Jarl Tyen having a great final end to the battle. And the likes of Jeff Fournier, Dennis Jordan and the new boy Alex Siebel in the top 6 with Rudy Van Buren only 8th. That at least proves he is human and does make mistakes. But heading to Monza, I don't think there are going to be many mistakes from Vodbull this time. I'm Jake Sanson. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time for more action from Monza.